Let me ask you something. Have you ever confidently cited a case in a moot or an exam only to later realize that the judgment was overruled? Or you read a Supreme Court judgment and saw words like distinguished, reversed, or overridden, but you weren't fully sure what they actually meant? This one mistake can cost us marks, arguments, and credibility. And here is the scary part. Most law students think that they understand these terms until they are actually asked to explain them. So, in the next 7 minutes, I am going to break down every major way a judgment is treated by the court in the simplest language possible. So, this is not just a theory. This appears in constitutional law, jurisprudence, moots, judiciary preparation, and interviews. If you watch this video till the end, you will never be confused while reading judgments again. So let's start with distinguished. A judgment is said to be distinguished when the court accepts the earlier decision as correct law, but says that this precedent does not apply to the present case. Why does this happen? Because the court finds that the essential facts or circumstances of the present case are different from those of the earlier case. Even if at first glance the facts appear similar, the court may still distinguish the precedent if the context is different or the principle or policy reasoning behind the earlier judgment does not fit the current situation. This is very important to remember. Distinguishing does not overrule the previous judgment. The earlier judgment continues to be valid law, but its scope is narrowed down. In simple words, distinguishing means good law, but not for this case. Now let's move to overruled. A judgment is said to be overruled when a higher court declares that the legal principle laid down in an earlier case is wrong. When this happens, the old legal rule is set aside and it is no longer considered a binding law for future cases. Overruling is usually a hierarchical action. For example, the Supreme Court overruling a High Court judgment or a larger bench overruling a smaller bench of the same court. The legal impact of overruling is serious. Once a judgment is overruled, it loses its precedential value completely. In simple terms, overruling means the precedent is dead for the future. For example, in 2018, the Supreme Court of India decriminalized adultery and overruled its all previous judgments. Next is overridden. Now comes overridden, also known as legislative overruling. This is very different from judicial overruling. Let us see how. Here the judgment is not invalidated by a court but by a higher authority, that is the legislature. This happens when Parliament or the legislature passes a new law. That law changes the legal position and as a result, the earlier judicial decision becomes ineffective. It is important to understand that the court's judgment is not declared wrong. Instead, the law itself is changed and the precedent is superseded. That is why we say the legislature can override a judgment, but it cannot override the constitution. For example, the Rajiv Gandhi government, which passed the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986 to nullify the Supreme Court's 1985 Shah Bano judgment, which had granted a divorced Muslim women the right to maintenance under Section 125 of the Criminal Procedure Code. Now, let's move to reversed. A judgment is said to be reversed when an appellate court, meaning a higher court, reviews a lower court's decision and finds it incorrect. The appellate court may reverse a judgment because of incorrect interpretation of law, legal error, or procedural irregularities. When a judgment is reversed, the original decision is usually vacated and the case may be sent back for a fresh trial, remanded with specific directions, or finally decided by the appellate court itself. The key point to remember is this, that reversal affects the outcome of that particular case, not necessarily the validity of the precedent as a whole. So, if you remember only one thing from this video, remember this, that courts don't casually use words like distinguished, overruled, reversed, or overridden. Each word has a very specific legal consequence. Once we understand these terms, we stop reading judgments like a student and start reading them like a lawyer. And if this video helped you, save it, because sooner or later you will need it again. Thank you so much.